There's a communication technique so powerful that it was used by Soviet intelligence officers during the Cold War to extract classified information from American military personnel. The fascinating part? The people giving up secrets had no idea they were being interrogated. They thought they were just having a casual conversation. This technique is called elicitation, and at its core lies a deceptively simple phrase, "I bet." Those three words, when used correctly, can get almost anyone to volunteer information they would never share if you ask them directly. And here's the thing, this isn't just spycraft. This same method is used today in business intelligence, sales negotiations, and even everyday conversations by people who understand how human psychology really works. Let me explain how it works and why it's so effective. The problem with questions. Think about what happens in your brain when someone asks you a direct question, especially about something sensitive. Let's say someone asks, "How much money do you make?" Or "What are you working on that's confidential?" Immediately, your mental defenses activate. You become guarded. You start thinking about what you should and shouldn't say. Your brain essentially puts up a security wall. This is a natural psychological response. Questions trigger our defensive mechanisms because we recognize we're being probed for information. We instinctively evaluate whether we want to share that information before we answer. But statements work completely differently in our brains. The power of statements. When someone makes a statement instead of asking a question, your brain doesn't register it as an information request. There are no alarm bells, no defensive walls go up. Instead, a different psychological trigger activates, the need to correct inaccurate information. Human beings have an almost compulsive need to correct things that are wrong. It's built into our psychology. When we hear something we know is incorrect, especially about topics we have direct knowledge of, we feel an overwhelming urge to set the record straight. This is the foundation of elicitation, and the phrase "I bet" is one of the most elegant ways to deploy it. How I bet works. Let's break down why these three words are so effective. Break down. When you say "I bet," followed by a statement, you're doing something psychologically subtle. You're not asking a question. You're not demanding information. You're simply expressing a supposition, almost like you're thinking out loud. "I bet you had some interesting experiences with that project. I bet that was challenging to pull off. I bet there were some obstacles you had to overcome." Notice what happens with each of these statements. The other person doesn't feel interrogated. They feel understood. And they naturally want to fill in the details, to share their experience, to correct any misconceptions you might have. The beauty is that even if your statement is accurate, people will often elaborate to confirm and expand on what you've said. And if your statement is inaccurate, they'll definitely correct you, and in doing so, they'll volunteer the real information. Real-world application, the Whole Foods example. Here's a practical scenario that demonstrates the technique perfectly. Imagine you walk into a grocery store and you want to know how much an employee makes. If you walk up and ask directly, "How much do you get paid?" you'll either get silence, a deflection, or be told it's none of your business, and rightfully so. But what if instead, while the employee is helping you find something, you casually say, "I just read that all Whole Foods employees got bumped up to $26 an hour. That's fantastic." Watch what happens. The employee's correction instinct kicks in immediately. "What? No, I make $17 an hour." They just volunteered their exact salary without feeling like they were interrogated. Why? Because they weren't correcting you from a defensive position. They were simply fixing inaccurate information. In their mind, they were being helpful, not revealing sensitive data. The Cold War story. This technique has a dark history that proves just how powerful it is. During the early Cold War, when American submarines would dock in ports like Thailand or Singapore, Soviet intelligence officers would position themselves in bars frequented by young sailors. These officers wouldn't look like spies. They'd be wearing Hawaiian shirts, looking like tourists or locals. They'd strike up friendly conversations with 19 or 20-year-old Navy personnel who were having drinks and relaxing after months at sea. And then they'd deploy elicitation. A Soviet operative might say something like, "I know the German submarines can outrun American ones because their propellers are 22 feet in diameter, and all of yours are only 18 feet. The young sailor, perhaps slightly drunk and definitely proud of his vessel, would immediately respond, "No, that's not right at all," and then proceed to give the actual specifications, dimensions, and capabilities. The sailor didn't think he was giving up classified information. He thought he was just correcting someone's mistaken impression. But that Soviet officer just gathered critical military intelligence without asking a single question. This happened repeatedly throughout the Cold War. Not through torture, not through coercion, but through understanding human psychology. Layering the technique. The real masters of elicitation don't stop at one statement. They layer multiple techniques to go deeper. After the initial "I bet" statement gets someone talking, you can add what's called disbelief to extract even more information. Let's say someone tells you about a business trip they took. You respond, "I bet that went perfectly smoothly with no challenges at all." Now you're using sarcasm wrapped in a statement. The person will almost always respond with, "Well, actually," and then proceed to tell you about all the problems, complications, and difficulties they encountered. You can also use bracketing, which means giving a range that you're fairly certain is incorrect. "I heard your company is planning to move sometime between March and May." If the actual date is February, the person will often correct you with the specific information. "No, it's actually February, but we're not really supposed to talk about it yet." Notice they've now told you not only the accurate time frame, but also acknowledged that it's supposed to be confidential, and they did this voluntarily. The recap technique. Another powerful addition to the "I bet" method is the recap. After someone volunteers information following your initial statement, you simply repeat back what they said in your own words. So what I'm hearing is that the project had budget issues and timeline problems. This does two things. First, it shows you're listening, which builds rapport. Second, it often prompts the person to add more detail or correct any nuances you got wrong in your summary. People love being understood, and when you demonstrate understanding through recapping, they'll often volunteer additional layers of information to make sure you've got the complete picture. Why this works better than questions. The fundamental reason elicitation is more effective than direct questioning comes down to one thing: perceived control. When you ask someone a question, they know they're being asked to give you information. They maintain control over what they choose to reveal. They can decline to answer, deflect, or lie. But when you make a statement, especially one that's slightly incorrect, the person doesn't feel like they're being asked for anything. They feel like they're simply correcting a misunderstanding. They're in control of the conversation, or so they think. In reality, you've created a psychological environment where they want to share information with you. You've triggered their natural instincts to correct inaccuracies and to be understood. The sensitivity rule. Here's an important principle to understand. The more sensitive the information you need, the fewer questions you should ask. For casual topics like coffee preferences or favorite restaurants, direct questions work fine. There's no psychological resistance to overcome. But for sensitive topics like salary, company secrets, personal challenges, or confidential plans, questions immediately raise defenses. That's when elicitation becomes not just useful, but necessary. The rule is simple. Sensitive information requires statements, not questions. Ethical considerations. Now, I need to address something important. This technique is powerful, and with power comes responsibility. Elicitation can be used for legitimate purposes like sales, negotiations, journalism, or simply building better relationships through improved communication. But it can also be used manipulatively to extract information people have a right to keep private. The difference between ethical use and manipulation often comes down to intent and context. Using these techniques in a business negotiation where both parties are trying to get the best deal is fair game. Using them to trick someone into revealing personal information they'd be harmed by sharing is not. Just because you can get someone to talk doesn't mean you should. Practical applications today. Beyond spycraft, this technique has numerous legitimate applications. In sales, instead of asking, "What's your budget?" you might say, "I bet you are working with a budget in the 50 to 75,000 range for this project." The client will often correct you with their actual budget. In journalism, instead of asking, "Were there problems with the project?" you say, "I bet that rollout went exactly as planned with zero hiccups." Sources will often open up about the real story. In management, instead of asking, "Are you struggling with this?" you say, "I bet you figured out all the challenges with this new system already." Your team members will feel comfortable sharing the real obstacles they're facing. The key is that people volunteer information much more freely when they don't feel interrogated. Mastering the technique. If you want to get good at this, start practicing with low-stakes conversations. Try using "I bet" statements instead of questions in your daily interactions and watch what happens. Pay attention to how differently people respond when you make statements versus when you ask questions. You'll quickly see that statements create openness, while questions create guardedness. The 3 words, "I bet," are your entry point into a more sophisticated understanding of human communication. They represent a shift from interrogation to conversation, from demanding information to creating an environment where people want to share. And that's ultimately what makes this technique so powerful. You're not forcing anything. You're simply understanding human psychology well enough to work with it instead of against it.